And we're live here with Dr. Thema, who is a minister, an educator, an author. She's a psychologist, she's an artist, she is a media consultant, and she is just a great person all around. She was the past president of the APA of 2023. And not only that, but she has a fresh new book just off the press called Reclaim Yourself. It's a workbook to the homecoming book that she released a couple years ago. So we're going to learn a little bit more about Dr. Thema. And yeah, listen up. Stay tuned. Thanks for coming, Dr. Thema. How are you today?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you so much for reaching out. I'm excited for this conversation and appreciate the work that you do to promote awareness about psychology.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Likewise, I admire you and I aspire to be you. So I really am here, trying to learn a little bit about you and your journey, right? When you're a little girl growing up, what was your family like? Was your family academians? Because you're a doctor.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So, both of my parents are in ministry. My dad was a pastor, he's now retired. And my mom, for many years, for decades, did women's ministry. And so, interestingly, in our community, the African American community, people are often hesitant to speak with a mental health professional because of the stigma or because of barriers with cost or just not being familiar with it. But many people would often seek counsel from their ministers or faith leaders. And so growing up, I was very much aware of my dad doing pastoral counseling. People would come to the church to meet with him or call our home when they were in distress about whatever the issue was. And so when I got older, I found out that being a psychologist or a therapist was a field in and of itself. And so I have always been what people would call like a more sensitive child or feeling things very deeply. So the idea of bearing witness and supporting people as they're healing and growing really appealed to me. Also, when I was growing up, later, my mom has been more forthcoming about her own journey dealing with depression and anxiety. So
Mm.
it was that I not only saw the benefits of providing care and support, but I also saw the heavy weight that many people live with and often don't talk about. And so that sensitivity, I would say, growing up, seeing my mom's struggles, as well as being a Black American, African American living in Baltimore at first, while
Mm.
there are many culturally rich aspects of Baltimore, Maryland, there's also high levels of violence and trauma. And then when my father, when I was a teenager in high school, my father was elected to be a bishop in the church, and his first appointment was to West Africa. So my parents, and I have one brother 2 years older, we all moved to Liberia, and that's how I got my interest in global affairs and also where I gained an even richer sense of my identity.
Wow.
Uh, and so that first year was amazing. And
Mhm.
then the challenge during the second year is a civil war broke out, and
Oh.
we ended up being evacuated. And so a part of that gave me my focus on trauma, uh,
Mm.
looking at, the ways in which trauma, violence, oppression can be so disruptive, and wanting to not only provide therapy, but also research about how people can heal.
Amazing. It sounds like you grew up in an awesome family. In I can see how being around your mom and dad and growing up inside the church might have given you this courage, this inspiration, right? You saw your dad, counseling people, and and speaking in front of public speaking sometimes is so scary for a lot of people. So you just had this modeling for you that's really amazing. That I think that's part of like also protective factor of growing up inside the church and having some serious values like instilled like since a young age. It's like you don't even question, you just hear it over and over in this model you hear. But also the responsibility of being the daughter of the right, the
Yes.
pastor,
Yeah.
right? You have to like walk the straight line.
Yes, that you're, often being observed. There's the pros and cons. So the benefit is so many people, I would say, were like my aunties or uncles, that you're a part of the community,
Mm,
and people are invested in you in some very positive ways. The challenges can also be, as you're naming, in some ways being monitored or, feeling under surveillance or what people's expectations are. But I feel like my parents did a good balancing act of, yes, their expectations and also your own person, right? And so growing and flourishing, and one of my key themes is like being authentic, right?
mm.
Being real, not just being who people think you're supposed to be.
Wow, amazing. Wow, there's so much there. Your whole experience of going to Liberia and all that and seeing trauma, face to face. So, you're a psychologist in mental health. You also mentioned something about, people in a black community, in Asian community, in Latin communities. If you only like, I don't know, maybe only white communities goes to the therapist. I don't
With less stigma, much less
know.
stigma. I'm sure those who are white and maybe in rural areas or, have other identity markers face some of those barriers as well.
As
Yeah.
well. And if you're maybe older generations not really used to
Right.
this, because it's kind of a newer field as
Yes.
well. And so, in face of all this, sometimes, there's people out there that could really benefit, that have trauma, that have anxiety, that have depression, or
Mhm.
just need to, have some more support. Sometimes we're so like isolated in our own cultures, right? We don't
Mhm.
have that community that you had. A lot of people are
Yeah.
just like, they have nobody. They have a cat,
Right.
so they need to talk. And sometimes they feel like, oh, I don't know, maybe I can't afford it, my insurance doesn't pay for it, they're gonna think I'm crazy or things like that. But it's really just kind of like for you to develop yourself, right? It's you can grow past like where you're at, and just really heal from like old, painful things that you might have experienced, and have somebody to relate to you, listen to you, that invested in your growth. It's really nice. Like I do therapy,
Yes.
and I
Yeah. Me
recommend
too.
everybody does therapy, right? Therapists have therapists,
Yeah.
coaches have coaches,
Mhm.
and things like that. So I learned being at Pepperdine and going through the whole clinical psychology program that there's such thing as community mental health.
Mhm.
Oh my God. People don't know about this. So,
Right.
what is community mental health, and how can people take advantage of that?
Yeah. So important to name the various ways that mental health professionals have tried to make the services more accessible, more engaging, more culturally attuned. And so, part of that can be community mental health agencies that either have no cost or low cost services. So sometimes if people are looking, they may see something called sliding scale.
Mm,
And so then that depends on, your income and your resources for them to determine how much the cost will be in order to access therapy,
mhm,
and whether they will take the format of workshops, of groups, uh, some work or transportation, you're not able to commit to a certain number of sessions, but the group, let's say, is every Friday at 2, and whenever you can make it, you can go there and make use of it. Sometimes there are also peer supports, so people who have gone through something similar may be a part of the resource team to help walk you through your journey. And so, while it is true that it can be challenging to find a provider or a therapist, a psychologist who is a fit for you, to know that it's not just services that are super high cost, that there
Mhm.
are more community based programs as well.
Yes, for example, when we go through the graduate clinical psychology program as students, the last year you're supposed to work and volunteer. So there are many students that are trained and competent to listen to your story, and they work and volunteer for this full year. We call practicum year, in which um, you can access the services. uh, I worked in two different agencies. One, it was low cost. People would pay what they could afford, sometimes $5, sometimes $10 a session. Amazing. And
Mm,
then other one was free, completely free.
yes.
So this is available to you. You're not alone,
Mhm,
in your pain, and people care.
mhm,
You might have experienced that maybe people around you, sometimes even our parents, sometimes parents, suffered and then they pass their suffering, intergenerational suffering. It
correct.
keeps going. But it's like, at some point we have to take that responsibility for our own healing, right? And then
Mhm,
go after, right?
mhm,
That what maybe it's spirituality,
mhm.
maybe is mental health, maybe it's both. I think to my on my experience, like I had a lot of childhood trauma, from neglect and from just different things that it happens in life is messy, and I from my experience, I had to reach and seek out several types of therapies. I
Mhm.
mindfulness, spirituality, therapy, neurofeedback, psychedelic assisted therapies, martial arts. So I've done it all. I think it takes like I think
I
it's
love the piece about martial arts. One of the things we've paid more attention to is the body, because
mm,
often traditionally people focused on like the thoughts and emotions. Can you share some about the role that martial arts played in your healing?
oh my god. Yes, like right now I'm like a five-time jiu-jitsu world champion.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
So that's how much
Amazing.
trauma I had.
Yeah. Tell me. Yeah. So what did you gain from that? Your sense of inner strength?
Absolutely. So I was in a very unfulfilling relationship of my own creation, of my own design. I put myself there.
Mhm.
And what happens is when I grew, I was very young. Like I married, I was 19. And then, by the time I'm 30, I'm a different person. Like I'm 30 and I'm looking like, I'm in a different country and I have kids, and like I don't even know who I am. It's like the whole idea of homecoming from your book really
Yes.
strikes a chord of like kind of losing yourself in a pleasing of others or whatever, some kind of role that you might create yourself, and
Mhm.
you can't just blame it on other people. It's like you have to take responsibility, like how am I creating this, created this chapter in my life, and then if I don't like it, how can I change it? So the jujitsu, like I start fighting, right? So I felt like I got stronger. And I
Mm,
think being physically strong and then fighting is an
mm,
analogy for fighting your own trauma, your own pain, like transforming the trauma into triumph. So I
mm,
start winning. And
mm,
I had a lot of anger from my childhood and things like that. So I put that stuff on the mat, and
mm,
I transformed, from the time I started probably very aggressive and angry. And then you kind of go through a process in martial arts in which you're supposed to refine yourself. It's not about the violence, it's about the refining of your emotions. Like it
mhm.
was not until I did a meditation, mindfulness, and did a lot of work on my therapy, couples therapy. It was not until I did this kind of work on myself that I was able to win my first world championship, because I had
Ah,
competed before. right? But
Yeah.
the emotions and the mental noise can block your success.
Mm.
So that was a key for me to be able to overcome and to really see this the success in front of me for the first time in my life. It was the inner work that I've done that really helped me to achieve. So the therapy and the inner work and the spirituality is not just, a mere question of, let me, just do what I have to do here, but it's like your success is dependent on that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's powerful. As you said, the inner work was required for you to get to your next level. And
Yeah.
so sometimes we try to avoid it, suppress it, deny it, but we really need to face it in order to free ourselves. And I appreciate what you were sharing about the process too of finding a therapist, because I want to encourage people to know
Mm,
therapists, psychologists have different styles and different personalities and different
mhm.
cultures. So if you go to one and it's not a match or you feel misunderstood, you don't want to just say, oh, well, therapy's not for me. This
Right.
just wasn't a match. And you can
Mhm,
continue to look and
mhm,
know that, as you described, we're deserving and worthy of care, and that the trauma doesn't have to be the final say in our lives. So I like to say trauma affects us, but it doesn't define us, that there is more to us than the ways in which people have mistreated us.
yes, and that's so powerful. A lot of people may carry trauma and don't even know that they have it. Like,
Mhm,
I didn't understand that until I got into Pepperdine. I had to go get a graduate degree in psychology to understand what I had, because some therapists might have missed.
mhm,
Trauma studies, it's kind of new uh, in the field. Like, maybe we have, what, 50 years of this, really, of research and studies under this. The DSM, the trauma definition itself, has been changing, so we're understanding trauma in different ways,
mhm.
right? And then the interventions, even, like, what really works. Like, we're still kind of learning different ways and different therapies that can really help us heal the trauma. So people don't even know that they can heal. You can heal from trauma. Trauma is not something that you how do you say, you're gonna have it for the rest of your life, like, right? It's not some kind of cards that you're dealt with at birth and then now you have to carry through your whole life. No, there's ways to heal it. And I would like to ask you, like, what are some of the most effective ways you've noticed that
Mhm.
really help transform the trauma inside of people?
Yeah. So one of them is therapy, and there are different modalities, different styles
Mhm,
of trauma informed therapy. And then I would say, in addition to therapy, people talk about bibliotherapy. So
mhm,
reading books about it. And I appreciate you. Um, Acknowledging both the homecoming book, The Body Remembers, is another
mhm,
one, and then the workbook that goes with homecoming is Reclaim Yourself. And so there are many written resources. I should also say, for some people who are not so much into reading, there are audio books as well,
mhm,
podcasts like this one. So all of these come under the umbrella of what's called psychoeducation. So
mhm,
learning more about it so that you connect the dots and understand yourself in a better way. There also are somatic approaches, so being tuned into the body.
mhm,
There's trauma informed yoga. You mentioned martial arts or dance. There's also mindfulness. There's mindfulness based therapy, but then there's just mindfulness as a practice.
mhm,
And so that can take the form of meditation, self acceptance, increasing your self compassion, and releasing your self judgments. A lot of people find journaling, and there are many research studies on the healing power of writing about our traumas, so
mhm,
that we're not just holding them in, but
mhm,
writing and working through the distortions. Some people like to apply their spiritual practices to their trauma. And then a big piece is um, positive responses to your disclosure. So
Mm,
many times our traumas we keep a secret. And so it can be so healing because people can hold shame or feel like they're unacceptable. And so to be able to, whether with a therapist, a family member, a friend, a partner, share your traumatic experiences and be met with support and belief and love, uh,
mhm,
and efforts to help you be safe. These can all be very therapeutic. And I want to name one that people often don't name,
mm,
is activism or volunteerism. So,
mm,
seeking to be a part of the solution. So, some
mhm,
people join Community Watch or become a rape crisis counselor or become a therapist,
mhm.
or talk in raise awareness in schools, or voting for policies that will support trauma survivors and victims of violence. That can also be empowering because the aim of trauma is for you to feel helpless, hopeless, powerless. And so when we regain our voice and our power and work collectively to make things better, that can be very healing.
How do you know that we have trauma?
So this is an important one about both what the event is and what its impact is. So there are everyday ordinary stressors, and then there are traumatic stressors, right? So an everyday stressor is just a source of stress that goes with the different roles you have in life. So
Like a
let's say,
bill,
you know, right,
unexpected medical bill.
yes, bills can be stressful. Parenting can be stressful. Studying for an exam can be stressful.
Mhm.
But we wouldn't call those traumatic stressors. Those are
Right.
like kind of everyday events.
Mhm.
Um, but then the experiences that are overwhelming, that can create a sense of hopelessness or terror, that are threatening, or actually physically harmful, or that they threaten to harm you, those are potentially traumatizing. And we also are aware not everyone who's exposed to a trauma then develops these long-term symptoms. Let's say if there's a school shooting, some of the kids who were at that school, may feel the grief or, shock of it. But then after a couple of weeks, they've moved on in a lot of ways. And then for other people, they can feel immobilized by it, overwhelmed by it, start having constant panic around it.
Mhm.
So it's both looking at what was the event I was exposed to or experienced, and then noticing how my distress is showing up. And is that distress persisting over time? That it wasn't just like a bad day. If I just had a bad day, we wouldn't say I was traumatized. I just had a bad day.
Mhm.
But when those symptoms continue to the point where it's difficult to function, then we're talking about the impact of trauma.
Yes, I noticed trauma comes with this symptoms of like hypervigilance,
Mhm.
right? Disembodiment. So hypervigilance would be like you, if you're traumatized, you always avoiding and kind of scanning your environment for something that could possibly go wrong. You become a little bit, right?
Yeah. And so the effects
Reactive.
you're talking about are with the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So
Mm,
that's one possible outcome. People might
mhm,
experience a trauma and have like depression, or experience a
mm,
trauma and have difficulty sleeping. But with
mhm,
PTSD, yes, you have the hypervigilance, feeling on guard all the time. You also
mhm,
can have avoidance. And so you start to avoid people, places, or things that remind you of the event.
mhm.
And then you also have intrusive thoughts. So that can be flashbacks, it can be nightmares. When you're trying not to think about it, it keeps showing up for you.
Mhm.
And then, of course, being disruptive in your ability to function.
So imagine if the trauma is intermarital or right,
Mm,
or maybe is in your family.
Uh-huh.
childhood trauma, and you grew up with that nightmare recurring over and over. It's not one event that you went to a war and came back and you suffered tremendously, and then you got, it's like the war is in your house every day, right? Some wives can be abused, or children can be abused, elderly sometimes. There's all these different traumas. It's day in and day out. So then imagine like trying to heal from that, and then you, even if you remove yourself from that situation and then trying to move forward, sometimes just being in another relationship might remind you of being in that other relationship. It may trigger this all these kinds of memories of the trauma. So it's like the past contaminating the present,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk would say. I think it's fascinating. I really think that there's, hope for people that have these traumas. If you have these symptoms, you can find community health, you can do your work. There's all these kinds of different therapies that you can do and try. It's not about how much money. It's just like you have to, seek it out. You ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways that we can heal. We can all deserve to heal. It's our birthright. And in speaking of our deservingness, right, and of our birthright, how does spirituality comes in, right? You're a minister, so I've heard you speaking, so you can
Mm-hmm.
speak, healing in the people. So how does
Yes,
that work?
yes. So, it's important that we think holistically, that trauma affects our psychology, it affects us
Mhm,
physically, it can affect you economically, it can
mhm,
cause difficulty for you at school or at work. So then financially, all of these different areas. So then healing really needs to address all these areas. So
right.
one of the ways it can affect you is spiritually. So some people experience a loss of faith because they
Mm,
may say like, well, I was told that God was this loving being, but this terrible thing happened. So, like, how
mhm,
do I reconcile that?
mhm,
Or they may say maybe not faith in a higher power. They may have had a faith in humanity. And I've heard people say, like, I never imagined that people were capable of doing such terrible things or would want to do such harmful things. So you can have a loss of faith. Some people have an increased faith. So they may feel like, I know it is only because of my faith that I made it through this terrible situation. And then some people have a change in their faith. So they change traditions or change their beliefs as a result of the trauma. But our spiritual practices can also be a part of our healing. Those are both our belief systems and our actual coping strategies and behaviors. So, beliefs may be the idea that someone's saying, I get relief because even though I didn't see the person face a consequence, I believe in like the divine ordering
mm,
of things that in some way they will have to answer for what they did. So that might
mhm,
give them a sense of relief. The idea that my family didn't believe me, but God believed me, that can give people a sense of kind of a divine peace, a belief that I was treated like trash, but I believe I am sacred. So that sacred identity can help you in terms of specific behaviors. People may pray, may meditate, may go out in nature, may be a part of a faith community or a spirituality group, and in the process, may go to pastoral care and counseling. So whether through the reading sacred texts is another one that people can utilize to restore themselves. And so our spirituality or religion or faith can take many different forms, but it's important that we not neglect that aspect of ourselves and to explore to see what are the ways that will be nourishing to you, that will be life giving to you. And I know we are at our time, but I just want to thank you so much for holding this space for me and for everyone who is watching, for us to be mindful that healing is possible. And I'm so glad that it is not just something the two of us have read, but that we have
mhm,
both lived it as survivors who
mhm.
have turned full circle to go back and help people who are trying to survive. So thank you for the work you've done on yourself, but also thank you for being in this field to be of service to others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thema, for your time. And could you please share with us your website and in links where people can find your book? We're very excited about the Reclaim Yourself workbook that just came out, that I suggest everybody go grab a copy. We're going to post the links here for you to find
Yes,
and
thank you.
learn
The
more.
website is drthema.com, drthema.com. I am Dr. Thema on Instagram, dr.thema. And you can get the book at major bookstores like Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. You can also support independent bookstores to get both Homecoming as well as the Reclaim Yourself workbook.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Thema, for your time and have a blessed day.
Thank you. Bless you.
Bye.